Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. Naruto bounded down the stairs, smiling energetically. He had the day off since he'd completed the first exam on day 1 and he was intent on taking advantage of it. Training, thought the young Namikaze over and over. His mother had promised to show him 2 new kenjutsu techniques once he passed the exam, and now he could finally add some more variety to his swordplay. He knew today would be a good day, the only potential downside being his father giving him another talking to. Apparently, Yugao had talked to Minato about some mistakes Naruto made. The most glaring were his intentions to test himself and how he talked about what his techniques could do. His dad had lectured the blonde for an hour at the least later that day. It hadn't been fun, and considering he'd been hoping to find Hinata and repay her around that time only made it worse. Once the lecture was over, it was time to start training with his dad, and he never made it out of the house. By the time training was over, he was too tired to move after all. Morning, Naruto. Naruto was pulled from his thoughts by his father's voice. Looking around, he realized he'd made it to the kitchen without even noticing. If he'd kept walking, he would have probably ended up running into the door. Morning, Dad, he replied, beaming. Looking at the table, he saw plates set out and he could hear his mother in the kitchen. Licking his lips, he resolved that training could wait. Taking a seat at the table, he waited for his mom to bring breakfast. Kushina watched as Minato and Naruto sat underneath a tree together, meditating. She'd been overseeing their training when it came to the Kyuubi. Right now, the two of them were trying to contact the Biju. Minato had made it clear that when he'd put the seal on Naruto, he'd hoped that one day he and the fox could become friends. The Yondaime thought there would be a day when man and Biju would need to work together. Naruto thought the idea to be cool at first, but then his father had explained that the circumstances surrounding such a moment would probably not be the best. Making sure his son understood, he explained how imperative it was to reach the Kyuubi and try to make friends. If they did not, Minato was sure there would be some grave consequences. The Yondaime was sure the masked man would come back for the Kyuubi at some point, and there was a possibility that Naruto would need the Biju's help to win the battle. If he had to fight against the masked man and the Kyuubi's influence at once, Minato wasn't sure he would be victorious. He knew the Kyuubi wouldn't accept his son right now, but Minato didn't want to waste any time. There was no telling when the masked man would come for the Kyuubi again after all. As Kushina continued to watch her boys, she was thankful that she knew the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. There were so many genin participating in the exams that there was no way they could truly have a 1:1 ratio between test givers and test takers. That said, Kushina had to make a few Kage Bunshin yesterday, and even then, they still had to test 3 to 4 Chunin hopefuls each. Unfortunately, some hadn't shown up, so she still had to be out and about in the village today, and that is why she loved her Kage Bunshin. She'd have been in a terrible mood if she'd missed out on their family's breakfast chit-chat, and even more pissed if she hadn't been able to show Naruto a few more Uzumaki Kenjutsu techniques after breakfast. Training was something their family seemed to thoroughly enjoy, and as odd as it was, they bonded quite a bit during it. Yes, Kage Bunshin was becoming one of Kushina's favorite jutsu. As she looked out at her son and her husband, she knew she wouldn't trade a day like this for the whole world. Naruto yawned as he made his way to training ground 44. After training with his parents yesterday, the rest of the day had gone by in a blur. Aside from search for Hinata, and fail to find her, he'd run into Sakura on her way out of the library. He'd wanted to ask if she'd passed the exam, but she'd been in a hurry, only telling him that she had to go meet her new sensei for some training. Naruto had been fairly confused, to say the least. The rest of the day was spent in meditation. After hours of it, which could have been shorter had he not kept getting distracted. He'd managed to actually dive into his mindscape. The Kyuubi had been waiting for him, knowing that Naruto was attempting to speak with him. Ever hopeful, Naruto tried befriending the fox. His dad had said it would be important since some weird masked guy would be coming for him. The Kyuubi had initially laughed in his face before his attitude took a 180. He'd fixed Naruto with the most menacing glare the boy had ever seen, acing intent the likes of which Naruto hoped to never feel directed at him again flooded the sewer that was his mind. Following that, the Kyuubi growled, telling Naruto he was a fool and that he would be free someday before roaring and essentially kicking Naruto out of his own mind. All things considered, Naruto thought he was off to a great start. After such a day, one might expect the young Jinchuriki to be tired, but in fact he hadn't been able to sleep much last night. He'd been so excited for today that he just couldn't stay asleep for long. Thankfully, he'd always seemed to have an endless amount of energy, so aside from being a bit sluggish, which he knew would not last, he wasn't tired at all. Picking up his speed, Naruto quickly arrived at the outskirts of a gated forest. Looking at it, he noted that it gave off quite the ominous aura. Assuming that this was where he'd be going for the second exam, Naruto hummed, knowing that this would be quite the day. Looks like you passed, Dobi. Turning around, he met eyes with Sasuke. The young Uchiha was casually strolling up to his blonde teammate, hands in his pockets as usual. Yeah, I did fine, Tem. No thanks to you. Sasuke scoffed at the reply. And if you'd failed, you'd get me disqualified. We're on the same team, Sasuke. Whether you helped me out or not, if I'd failed, you'd have failed regardless, replied Naruto. Were you not paying attention when that part was explained? He added teasingly. The Uchiha bristled at this, but before he could retort, their third teammate called out to them. Hi Naruto. Hi Sasuke-kun, greeted Sakura, giving Sasuke a cutesy look as she called his name. Sasuke heaved an inaudible sigh, looking away from the fangirl in the process. As Sakura visibly deflated at his lack of care for her, Naruto watched the scene play out and wondered what it would be like to take Sasuke's place for once. Hey Sakura. Glad you passed. You worried me yesterday, said Naruto, resting his arms behind his head with a smile. Sakura nodded, offering a smile in return, though hers was somewhat strained. Yeah, sorry about that. I got someone to teach me medical ninjutsu and they're pretty strict. If I'd stopped to chat with you I would have been late and that wouldn't have ended well, replied Sakura. She sighed, thinking about her meeting with Oyon yesterday. Sakura walked into the hospital a minute to 6. She'd been sitting on a bench outside for the past 5 minutes, waiting for the time to draw just a little close to 6. She would have walked in earlier, but she figured Oyon would be busy and wouldn't want her around just yet. Thankfully for Sakura, with a sensei like Kakashi, waiting a measly 5 minutes was nothing. Looks like you're on time, said Oyon as Sakura neared the front desk. Next time just walk in early. I could see you from here. Blushing slightly, Sakura nodded. At the very least, I'm glad you've got the drive to become a chunin. That's not going to be enough though. You want to be a medic nin, yeah. Well then, I personally don't want you in the second exam if you don't know how to heal someone. You've got till midnight to learn how to heal basic wounds. If you can't then I won't be passing you. I'll be at the front desk by then, since that'll be when another one of my shifts here ends. Get going. At a loss for words, Sakura merely nodded and made her way out of the hospital. She'd spent the rest of that day until 3 in the afternoon at the river, practicing medical jutsu on a fish while reading over books on the art to make sure she was doing it right. Her progress had been very slow going in her opinion and she worried that she may not figure it out in time. Once her watch hit 3, Sakura resolved to go and meet Oyon in hopes of getting her help. She doubted the cranky woman would do anything, aside from fail her, but she figured she would fail regardless unless she got some help. Once she'd made it to the hospital, Sakura was told Oyon's next desk shift would begin at 4, so the Pinkett waited near the front desk, reading a book on medical ninjutsu until she arrived. "You're back early." Giving up, Sakura tore her eyes away from her book and looked up. Meeting eyes with the stern gaze of Oyon, she shook her head. Before the ever-grumpy medic Nin could speak up, Sakura told her of her progress and asked the woman if she would help. "You're asking your proctor to help you pass a test?" asked Oyon, trying to confirm if she was hearing this right. Sakura nodded nervously. "Show me what you can do," Oyon replied as she turned and beckoned Sakura to follow. Closing her book as she got to her feet, Sakura did just that. The two soon found themselves in a vacant room down the hall from entrance. Oyon hoped no one came to the front desk as she told Sakura to do her thing. Complying with Oyon's request, Sakura set to work on a fish that was already in the room. She assumed this must be where budding medics came to practice, as there were fish tanks within the room. After a few moments, scratches on the fish were healed, but the main problem, which was a rip in its fin, did not repair itself. "To be honest, I didn't expect you to get this far," said Oyon as Sakura frowned. When the Pinkett was about to retort, she continued. "Most people can't do what you've done by themselves, and certainly not after a few hours. You must have a knack for medical ninjutsu. I expected you to come asking me for help a lot sooner, maybe even right after I'd given you the task. You've still got a ways to go, but you will be a good medic one day. So, how about this? You've passed this exam." Sakura's eyes lit up, but before she could say anything, Oyon cut her off. "I like your resolve, Sakura. Not many of the other Chunin hopefuls of tested have had the same drive as you, and none of them wanted to be medics either. So, I'm going to make you an offer. Like I said, you've got a knack for medical ninjutsu, but you could definitely be better. How about I teach you?" Sakura wasted no time in replying. "Yes. Thank you. I'd love it if you would teach me more about medical ninjutsu." Oyon nodded before leading the girl back to the front desk. "I've got to work until 6. Meet me back here then and we'll get started." "I'll be here, Oyon-sensei," beamed Sakura. After passing her test, Sakura had gone to the library where she'd spent her time reading more about medical ninjutsu before she made her way back to the hospital, bumping into Naruto along the way. The Pinkett had to admit, yesterday had been quite eventful for her, and she honestly wouldn't change it for the world. "So, what do you guys think this next exam will be?" she asked. Her teammates shrugged, neither having any real idea aside from assuming it would be physical. With that as a basis, they jumped into a conversation about the exams, not even noticing as more and more teams arrived. They'd have continued to chat and plan, but were put on alert when a smoke bomb went off around the teams. When the smoke cleared, they saw a banner hanging from a tree that read, "Welcome to the second exam." Below the banner stood a purple-haired woman in fairly revealing clothes. Aside from trench coat that covered her arms and her backside, there was little left to the imagination. "Hey there, brats. I'm Mitarashi Anko, your proctor for this part of the Chunin exams. It looks like 20 teams made it through. No worries, I'll make sure this exam cuts that in half at the least," said Anko, grinning. Some genin had to repress a shiver. Kiba snorted, yelling that nothing she could dish out would stop his team from winning. Shortly after that, his arrogance was scared out of him when a kunai flew past his cheek, cutting into it and drawing blood. As if that wasn't enough, Anko had already appeared behind him. Licking the blood off his cheek, she replied, Brats like you die the fastest. Kiba gulped and Akamaru retreated into his partner's hood. Smirking at a job well done scaring the genin, Enko prepared to make her way back to the front of the group until she caught a very long tongue in her peripheral vision. Immediately on guard, Enko whipped around to see a Kusa Kunoichi behind her, a kunai being held by her tongue. Your kunai, Mitarashi-san. Narrowing her eyes, Enko reached out and took her kunai back. Thanks. Some genin snuck up on me. I don't believe that. I better keep an eye on this one, thought Enko as she reclaimed her spot in front of the genin. Wiping the frown off her face, she spoke up again. I'm not one for long explanations, so here's how it's going to go. Each team is going to get a scroll of heaven or a scroll of earth. Then you brats are going to be sent into the forest. In the forest is a tower. That's where you need to get to. Find it. You've got 5 days to make it there, but you need both scrolls with you when you get there to pass. In other words, steal them from another team. If you open your scrolls before you're in the tower, your team is disqualified. 5 days, yelled Choji. What about food? A redhead Kumo Kunoichi glanced his way, her brow arched. She wondered if he was being serious because the answer to his question should be obvious. Snorting to herself, she looked away thinking that Konoha ninja were ridiculous. There's plenty to eat in the forest, grinned Anko, just make sure it doesn't eat you first. On that note, she trailed off as she reached into her trench coat and retrieved some papers. I'm going to need you brats to sign these. Why? Asked Ataki Kunoichi. She had tan skin, green hair, and orange eyes. Because you guys are going to be fighting over these scrolls and this exam has no rules. Basically, we need to make sure your villages don't come trying to start a war with us when one of their teams dies in this forest. No one said anything after that. The mood was setting in now. They could really die in these exams. Team 7 had just turned in their waivers and had collected their scroll. They'd gotten an Earth scroll, and now that they were waiting for the exam to start, they were trying to figure out what to do with it. Give me the scroll, said Naruto. Sasuke and Sakura gave him a look. A look that clearly wondered if he was serious. Why would we do that, Naruto? Asked Sasuke, scowling. You screw up. A lot. Give us one good reason why we should let you hold onto this. He asked, waving the scroll in front of the blonde, his voice dripping with bastard. Because I'm better at fuinjutsu than you'll ever be, and I can easily seal the scroll where no one can get it. Retorted Naruto, a challenging smile on his lips. You, fuinjutsu. Sasuke mocked, scoffing. Kakashi-sensei told us how good your clan was with it, but I've seen fuinjutsu. I've even tried to study it myself, though my interest in it was brief. I can't believe that you got something so complicated down, Dobi. Frowning, Naruto snatched the scroll from Sasuke faster than the Uchiha was prepared for. Pulling up the orange sleeve on his right arm, Naruto pressed his left hand into his shoulder, and after a moment fuinjutsu script appeared. Naruto remembered how he'd had to sit and write out all his fuinjutsu up until the last 2 weeks of his training. He didn't mind it, as he was able to do it rather quickly by then, but when his parents had taught him how to apply fuinjutsu script without needing anything but his hands and his chakra, he'd been ecstatic. It was hard to learn, and he'd spent a majority of his Kage Bunshin's time working on it, but eventually he got it down. The young Jinchuriki could easily imagine so many possibilities with being able to quickly apply fuinjutsu like that. Touching the scroll to the fresh script on his shoulder, Naruto sealed the scroll away before covering the seal up with his sleeve again. I'm an Uzumaki, Tem. The sealing arts are basically in my blood, grinned Naruto triumphantly. His teammates didn't know how literal that statement was. Sasuke gave a small smirk, now even more interested in how much his blonde rival had grown. Sakura merely looked on, slightly amazed with Naruto's skill in sealing. She'd read up on it after Kakashi had talked about the Uzumaki clan, and she knew that being able to create fuinjutsu without nothing but your hands and chakra was quite the advanced technique. Certainly, no beginner could do it. So, you guys heard about my clan? Asked Naruto. Sakura nodded and Sasuke merely grunted before speaking up. I've actually been meaning to ask you about that, and maybe talk to the 2 clan members who have been teaching you too. Why? Asked Naruto, hoping Sasuke wasn't going to try and get training from them. Not that he could really learn much anyway. On that note, Naruto also wondered what he'd meant by 2 clan members. Aside from himself, there was only one living Uzumaki clan member he knew of, and that was his mother. Briefly, Naruto wondered what exactly Kakashi had told his team. It's personal, replied Sasuke, glancing at Sakura briefly. I'll tell you later. Though confused, the blonde nodded. Now that that's out of the way, said Sakura, what's our plan inside the forest? I say we use the first day for recon, offered Sasuke. Usually, he'd prefer to just rush into a fight while keeping his wits about him, but Kakashi had made him realize he needed to think a bit more tactically if he wanted to be a Chunin. As Sasuke rubbed his arm at the mere thought of the memory, he wondered why his Cyclops of a sensei couldn't have made the lesson less painful. That sounds fine with me, replied Naruto. I can send out some hanged cage bunshin while the 3 of us find a place to set up a base of sorts. His teammates would have given him an odd look at his sound strategy, but they were starting to get used to him being a little smarter. As long as he didn't do anything too surprising, which he was bound to do eventually, this was Naruto we're talking about. After all, they wouldn't be caught off guard with him knowing more than before. I can set up a genjutsu around our little camp, said Sakura, contributing to their plans. I learned a pretty good one from Kurenai-sensei that should work very well for misguiding any would-be attackers. I can also weave a genjutsu while we're searching for a camp. That way it's less likely we'll be followed. As long as they're not a Hyuga, this should work. The genjutsu I learned was mid-chunin level. No normal genin should be able to detect it. Sasuke gave his usual HN, and Naruto smiled, about to reply when Anko spoke up once again. Okay brats. It's the moment of truth. The second exam starts now. The gates opened and genin began to make their way into the forest from all sorts of different locations. Team 7 did the same while putting their plan into action. Sakura activated her genjutsu while Naruto created a horde of cage bunshin, transformed to look like animals as they ran into the forest, taking to the trees. This should do, said Sasuke as he pulled his kunai from the neck of a rather large tiger. It made a wet, squelching noise as it left the beast's flesh. Flicking the blood off his weapon, he dropped it back into its pouch as he watched Naruto make another batch of hanged cage bunshin while Sakura weaved the genjutsu that would make finding the 3 of them all the more difficult. Not the best place to be living for a few days, if it even takes us that long to find a heaven scroll, but it'll do, Ibeo, Naruto replied as his clones fanned out. Currently the 3 of them were in front of a cave. It had been where the tiger was living. When Team 7 had stumbled across the place, the beast made the mistake of attacking instead of fleeing, and it had to pay for such transgressions with its life. What now? Asked Sakura, having finished her genjutsu. We should do some recon, of course, Sasuke responds. Don't worry about that, Naruto interrupts as they walk into the cave, lighting up the dark space thanks to a small kaiden jutsu that Sasuke knew. My clones will handle that. They won't have any trouble finding a scroll or the tower, and we'll know as soon as they do. Then what are we supposed to do in the meantime? I don't like sitting around, Sasuke retorts. The young Avenger certainly wasn't as hyperactive as Naruto, but aside from when he was in class during the academy or waiting on Kakashi to arrive, he never just sat around. He was always training, and if he wasn't, he was reading up on new training methods and techniques, eating, or sleeping. There were other little moments too, like when he's making sure he's well groomed for the day, but he didn't really consider moments such as those. Maybe we should talk, Sakura suggests, earning her a look from the Uchiha. He wasn't about to share anything from his personal life with the Pinkett. Realizing that she should probably clarify, she continued. I don't mean anything casual, we've not functioned as an actual team for the past 2 months and we've all learned new things. Don't you think we should have an understanding of what each of us can do? It will help when we coordinate attacks. Sasuke gave his usual, HN. Now that he understood what she was suggesting, he didn't have any objections. Looking to Naruto, he saw that the blonde also found the suggestion to be a good one. With that, the two gave their agreement and Team 7 started a conversation about their techniques. As Team 7 discussed each other's new abilities, Team 8 flew through the trees. Unlike Team 7, they opted to quickly find a scroll and head for the tower. They had better recon skills than Team 7, and with that said, they could easily do it on the move. With Shino's Kikaichu all around the forest, they would have the location of the tower in no time. Hinata had picked out a team with an earth scroll before actually entering the forest using her Byakugan, and Kiba had caught their scent after she'd pointed them out. The team they'd selected was a group of AIM Nin. They seemed to be relatively strong, but Team 8 knew they were better. Having entered the forest from a different area than the AIM Nin, they had some ground to cover before they reached them. Despite that, they were making good time and Hinata was positive they'd make contact within the next hour or so. As they leapt through the trees, Hinata's mind drifted to Naruto. She knew it wasn't smart to get distracted while in a situation such as this, but sometimes she just couldn't help it when it came to her blonde crush. Hinata had heard that Naruto had been looking for her yesterday. Apparently, he'd ran into Shino while searching for her and asked the Aburame where she was. Shino didn't know and told him as much, prompting the boy to give his thanks regardless of the answer before offering a quick goodbye and leaving to continue his search. Hinata didn't want to get her hopes up too much, but she had a hunch as to why he may be looking for her. He promised her that they'd eat cinnamon buns together, and while she hadn't fully expected him to remember the promise, so far it seemed like he did. She knew Naruto never went back on his word, it was his Nindo after all. With that in mind, she was sure that he would take her out for those cinnamon buns. She just hadn't expected him to be trying so soon. Despite what one may think, the Hyuga heiress was even happy he hadn't found her. She still wanted to eat with him, of course, but if it had happened so soon she would have had no time to prepare. Aside from preparing herself mentally, she also wanted to prepare herself physically. She intended to take the words of her riddle to heart, and so when the time came for him to treat her, Hinata wanted to make an impression on the boy. She doubted she could do something that would make her feelings known, but she hoped she could at least make him see her as someone worthy of having a relationship with. The heiress was no fool. Hinata knew that would require a huge amount of mental strength on her part, as well as a bit of a makeover. She didn't think anything was wrong with what she usually wore, no, not at all. Hinata was positive that she could even make an impression while in her usual attire too, provided she try hard enough, of course. The thing is, she just wanted a little extra oomph. A greater affect, so to speak. She'd made up her mind to be a bit bolder, and deciding to leave her comfort zone, wearing something a bit different was the first step she chose. Kiba, Hinata, called Shino, rousing the timid Hyuga from her thoughts, my Kikaichu have returned and they have located the tower. Following our retrieval of the scroll, we shall not waste any time before going there. With the location of the tower now known, the three of them picked up their pace. They didn't want their targets getting taken down before they got to them. As the genin ran around in the forest, Anko looked at the congregation of trees that made it up from outside the gate. The batch of genin seemed decent this year. She almost felt bad that half of them would most likely not be leaving the forest alive, almost. Shrugging at the losses that would certainly occur, Anko was about to quickly grab some dango to snack on before someone called to her. What is it? She sighed, irritably as she turned to see two fellow Konoha. They were interrupting dango time. She did not appreciate that. There's a problem, you've got to see this. Grumbling, she wondered why they couldn't have taken care of the problem themselves as she followed them. Did they really need to involve her? What could possibly happen that they couldn't handle by themselves? Realizing what she was thinking, Anko cleared her mind, pushing the irritation out. She shouldn't let her annoyance take over for her. Thinking it over again, she knew that the two shinobi knew better. They wouldn't call her unless something serious had happened, especially since the second exam had only just begun. Problems this early? Really? Such a thing was unheard of. Stopping near some bushes that were close to the forest, the two Konoha told her to look for herself. Going along with them, she did just that. And then she swore. When did you find this? Anko asked as she examined the three bodies further. They were Kusa the genin that she saw enter the forest to be exact. Of course, now she knew that wasn't them. What's worse is she only knew of one jutsu that could leave a corpse in this state. Only one man used such a vile technique that stole the faces of his victims. Only moments before we alerted you. Nodding, Anko told the two of them to find some medic nins as she jumped onto a tree branch. They may have been dead, as if Orochimaru would leave any witnesses, but there may be something they could discover from their corpses. Make sure we have all the information on them before you find me again, got it? I'm going to talk to the Hokage. This is serious, and with that she was gone. Troublesome, sighed Shikamaru as Choji rolled past him, tearing through anything that dared obstruct his path. Should we really be helping a team from another village? He asked, despite the fact that he was going along with this anyway. A few minutes ago, Choji had stumbled across a team of Kumo nin. They looked worse for wear. They were bruised, scratched, bleeding here and there, and one of them couldn't seem to stand. Had that been all that was wrong, Shikamaru would have stopped Choji from helping, though he doubted he'd have to. The young Akamichi knew better than to help another team just because they looked a little injured. They could easily be faking. Of course, that wasn't why he was helping. Aside from looking injured, various carnivorous creatures surrounded them: giant bears, equally large tigers, and unnecessarily big spiders, which Ino had almost freaked out over when she saw them. As far as Choji had been concerned, that was enough reason to help. As Ino made her way to the injured shinobi, Shikamaru weaved through hand signs. Kujimane no Jutsu, he called, his shadow stretching out and capturing the animals and insects that were preparing to attack. There were a lot of them, but ever since Asuma had increased their training, and his mother found out about it, the number of things he could restrain with his shadow had been increasing. This would be no trouble for him. Besides, he knew he wouldn't have to hold the creatures for long. Right before Choji rammed into the first tiger, Shikamaru's shadow receded from it. The tiger was brought down while Choji and Shikamaru repeated the process until all of the creatures had been soundly defeated. Their work done, the two of them walked over to Ino and the injured Kumo nin. Thanks, said one of the girls. She was a redhead. You're lucky Choji's such a softie, commented Shikamaru, ignoring the indignant, "Hey." he received from his friend. I personally thought helping out would have been troublesome. The redhead turned to Choji now, offering her thanks. "Well, it was nothing," he replied, bashfully, "glad I could help." "It wasn't nothing to us," the redhead replied. "You saved our lives and for that we thank you. I'm Karui, by the way. These are my teammates, Omoi and Samui." Choji nodded and proceeded to introduce himself and the members of his team. As he did so, Karui looked at him and couldn't help but take back the thoughts she'd had about him before the test began. He was a better shinobi than she'd thought. Minato stood to the side of Hiruzen as the two men worked on their paperwork. Around them was their Kage Bunshin doing the same thing. When Minato had asked Hiruzen why he didn't just use Kage Bunshin for his paperwork one day, the old Hokage had looked at him with wide eyes and then immediately grasped the bridge of his nose, heaved a loud sigh, and said he was ashamed of himself for not thinking of it earlier. He was the professor. He should have realized such a thing, shouldn't he? Now Hiruzen had finally discovered the secret to defeating the demon that was his paperwork, except it didn't really matter anymore. He was retired and the only reason he was acting as Hokage right now was because they'd yet to announce Minato's survival, and due to the exams, there were bound to be shinobi entering his office today that would not be privy to that particular secret. Minato was disguised thanks to the Uzumaki seal resting on his shoulder, but it would still raise unnecessary questions if any of his subordinates saw some shinobi they didn't recognize sitting at the Hokage's desk. It would prove to be a very good idea, as there was a knock on the Hokage's door right then. "You may enter," called Hiruzen, he and Minato looking away from the paperwork as they dismissed their Kage Bunshin. Opening the door, Anko stepped in, a very grave look on her face as she closed the doors to the Hokage's office behind her. "Hokage-sama, we have a problem," she reported, not intending to beat around the bush. "And that is?" asked Hiruzen in Minato's place. As far as the Yondaime was concerned, he'd merely scowled at the news and hoped it had nothing to do with Naruto. "Just a few minutes ago, some of my subordinates for the second exam found 3 bodies belonging to a team of Kusa Genin," she replied. "Now, considering the nature of the second exam, I wouldn't find this unusual except for the fact that the corpses were found outside the testing ground. That in itself is a cause for alarm, as it means someone hated them before the start of the exam, but the true problem lies in who did it. The state of the corpses upon my arrival at the scene answered that question, and it definitely isn't good news." "Who was it?" asked Hiruzen, grimacing. "The genin had been before the exam. It would have had to happen before Anko met with the teams, or she would have known something was amiss. The Sandaime knew this could possibly lead to some political complications as well. If they hoped to avoid such a problem, they would need to find the one responsible before the second exam reached its end." "The corpses had their faces removed," she replied. Hiruzen's eyes widened as Minato's fists clenched behind his back. He'd heard of the atrocities committed by Orochimaru after his death, and he found them to be unacceptable. He could only imagine what could have happened to Naruto if Orochimaru had known of the boy's identity, and it made him nauseous just thinking about it. "Orochimaru is here," replied Hiruzen, an undertone of sadness and anger lacing his words. Orochimaru had been his favorite at one time. The boy had seemingly been much like himself, but he was too greedy and a very jealous soul. He believed what he wanted was his by right, and his obsession with immortality had led to many atrocities within the village. Hiruzen had made the mistake of letting him get away years ago, and he'd regretted it then. Now, after the most recent events with Danzo, he regretted it even more. He wouldn't allow him to leave this village alive. If he stole the faces of those Kusagaku genin, then there is little doubt he is within the forest, said Minato. The Sandaime and Anko agreed. "Anko, gather Anbu and go into the forest and search for him. We must stop his plans, whatever they may be. Here, Hiruzen looks to his seemingly vacant couch. Fox, accompany her and alert me once you have found him. The once vacant couch remained vacant for a moment before someone came into view. She was a redhead with a fox mask adorning her face, Kushina. At once, Sandaime-sama. With that, the two of them left the room. This time, I will finish him, said Hiruzen, frowning at the battle to come. Minato looked to him, a frown on his face as well. No, you won't. I understand that you feel responsible for him, Hiruzen. While you are undoubtedly a powerful shinobi, even you must realize what would happen if you were to face Orochimaru as you are now, Minato says. The Sandaime went to protest, a slight twinge of insult in his eyes. He knew he was old, but he still had his pride and he was still a powerful shinobi. Minato would not let him interrupt though. Hiruzen needed to hear this. The odds are not in your favor. With age comes wisdom, but it also comes with weakness to a degree. You're no longer in your prime and surely Orochimaru has calculated a fight with you into whatever his plan may be. He's ready and we are not. I'm not going to let you die in a battle with him after you've finally retired either. No, I'll take care of Orochimaru. Hiruzen wished to give a retort of some sort, but Minato's reasoning was sound. Hiruzen could say nothing. Heaving yet another sigh, he complied with his successor. A Naruto clone raced through the forest, its henge gone. At this point, it was acting as a decoy in order to lead away anyone who may be close to their hideout. He felt he could trust Sakura's genjutsu, but better safe than sorry, right? The clone was just about to dispel itself when it heard a scream. Curious as to what it may be, the clone cautiously leapt off the canopy until he was looking down at a red-headed Kusa-nin cowering away from an abnormally large bear. Taking a quick look around, the clone didn't see any of her teammates, though he noted blood on the bear's claws. It could be a genjutsu, but the clone wasn't identifying any of the signs either. This is real, thought the clone. Her team was already dead, she obviously couldn't fight back. With no reason to just leave her, the clone jumped down, giving a battle cry to draw the beast's attention away from the girl. With a growl, the bear looked to the sky, just in time for the clone to land next to it as chains freed themselves from its right arm. The Kusa-nin watched as the chains twisted around Naruto's arm, encasing it and coming to a sharp point just ahead of where his fist had been. Dodging beneath the swing of a paw, the clone thrust its arm forward and with a pained roar the bear was impaled. Though severely injured, the beast didn't die. Enraged, it tried for another swing, but it never made it. Its body twitched before bumps squirmed along its fur. In the next second, with a spray of blood and a sickly-sounding wet noise, the chains emerged from the beast's chest, back, stomach, and neck before vanishing like ghosts. The bear fell to the ground as the Naruto clone moved to the side in order to avoid the corpse. Looking to his right side, he met eyes with the Kusa-nin and she backed away, frightened. Are you okay? Asked the clone. The Kusa-nin could only nod. Did it your team? She nodded again. If you want, you could come with my team to the tower, proposed the clone, though I would like to ask if you still have your scroll, and which one it is of course. I have a scroll of heaven. The clone's face lit up at her words. Really? That's awesome. You think my team could have it? We need one? Asked the clone excitedly. The Kusa-nin only nodded again, adjusting her glasses. The boy had just saved her and her team was dead. What would she need the scroll for anyway? Great. Oh, you know what? I haven't even gotten your name yet. I'm Karen, Uzumaki Karen. The clone's jaw dropped. Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura had just finished their little discussion when Naruto stiffened. He'd just gotten some information from one of his Kage Bunshin. We know where the tower is now, said Naruto. earning a nod from Sasuke as Sakura asked where. It's in the center of the forest. Not too long of a run if we go full speed. HN, was Sasuke's reply, all we need now is a scroll then. Nah, I've got that covered, came Naruto, energetic reply. Sasuke had been looking at him though and his mouth hadn't moved. Looking around they saw one of Naruto's Kage Bunshin approaching with a redhead at its side. Who's that with you? Asked Sakura, standing to her feet and drawing a kunai. She immediately began to wonder if the clone was a fake, though she knew such a thing was unlikely. Naruto had just recently explained this jutsu and the amount of chakra it requires. The odds of someone else knowing it in the forest were minuscule. Sasuke had a reaction much like Sakura, though he leaned more towards it being an elaborate genjutsu. He couldn't place when they could have gotten caught in it though, and besides, the enemy would have needed to get through Sakura's genjutsu first. He probably wouldn't admit it to her face, but she was good. There was no way any genin in this forest aside from himself or a Hyuga would have seen through it. Still, intending to be safe than sorry, Sasuke flashed his Sharingan, but the only genjutsu he noticed was Sakura's. No, what he was seeing was real. Why'd you bring someone back? Asked the original Naruto. Well, you see boss, her team was by a really big bear and I saved her. I said she could come to the tower with us in exchange for her scroll and she had a heaven. That's not even the best part though. Wait until you get these memories. Exclaimed the clone, his excitement evident to all those around before it dispelled. Naruto stiffened, which led Sasuke and Sakura to relax a little bit. Since he was actually receiving memories, it meant the clone was really his. Holy crap, said Naruto, shocked, this is awesome. He exploded, running towards Karen and enveloping her in a hug. What's going on, Dobi? Scowled Sasuke. Guys. Me. I can't believe it, Dadbao. Can't believe what, Naruto? Inquired Sakura, slightly annoyed at the lack of sense her blonde teammate was making. He'd been doing so well too, she thought to herself. Everything up until now was probably just a fluke, snorted inner Sakura, though the more dominant of the two found that to be unlikely. Guys, Karen's and Uzumaki. I can't believe this. I found more family. Karen blushed at the fuss her newfound relative was making over her. She'd thought the clone's reaction was excessive, she'd been wrong. Initially, when she told Naruto her name, he'd seemed almost insulted after overcoming his shock. That resulted in some questioning from him, but after showing the blonde the family tree she'd received from her mother, on her deathbed, he believed her after determining the document was real, something he'd learned to identify thanks to his mother. After that, his attitude did a 180 and he told her he was an Uzumaki too. She was more believing than he was, having vaguely remembered a story her mother told her about how the Uzumaki clan could use the adamantine sealing chains. Her surprise wasn't as extravagant as his either, but she was certainly very happy. She never thought she would be able to meet another clan member, yet here he was. Standing in front of her after saving her life. Karen didn't feel as alone in the world as she had only moments ago, she felt she could belong somewhere again. As far as the remaining members of Team 7 were concerned, their reactions varied. Sakura was pleasantly surprised. She congratulated her teammate, genuinely happy that he was able to meet someone of his clan. Sasuke congratulated him too, though there was a very apparent undertone of envy. The Uchiha could only wish something like this would happen to him, but he was no fool. Every Uchiha had been at the compound when Itachi struck. There were no survivors, none aside from him. Now in a significantly fouler mood, Sasuke decided to be a party pooper. We have a scroll now and we know where the tower is. Can we not waste any more time? Grumbled the Avenger, drawing everyone's attention before turning his back to them and jumping up onto a branch. As Sakura followed suit, Karen leaned over and whispered to Naruto. "What's his problem?" asked Karen, frowning slightly. She thought that the boy with the duck butt for hair was very rude. Naruto hummed, thinking over what might be the problem as he also took to the trees, Karen following behind him. Eventually, he had a guess that he was pretty sure was right. Sasuke lost his clan like us, the difference was that he was alive to see it happen and he was the only one that was spared death. I'm pretty sure he's just upset that I was able to meet another clan member and he'll never get that chance. Well, he will, but he'd only get to meet his brother, the one responsible for his clan's destruction, Naruto replied. He'd heard from his parents why Sasuke probably acted the way he did, not that they condoned it, but he understood why the boy was so caustic all the time. When his father told him that Itachi, Sasuke's own older brother, hated everyone in the clan, Naruto couldn't believe it. He couldn't imagine anyone doing that to their own family. It certainly made the blonde look at the boy that was Uchiha Sasuke in a different light. He understood now who the person was that Sasuke was so intent on. Karen only offered a solemn nod in response to the explanation. She understood what losing someone right in front of your eyes was like. Hinata trembled as she watched the youngest of the Suna shinobi lift an aim nin into the air with his sand before the aim nin was crushed with the sand in such a way that his blood literally exploded outward, showering down on the clearing the Suna nin and the remaining aim nin were doing battle. As she looked on, she wondered how her team had gotten into this situation. They could have avoided this, she knew it. They'd already gotten the scroll they needed from a different team of AIM shinobi, they could have just gone to the tower, but Kiba suggested thinning out the ranks. Kiba's idea sounded good at the time. Team 8 knew they were close to a few teams and if they took them out it would be less competition in the remaining exam. Nothing about it sounded like a bad idea and their confidence had been rather high since they defeated the AIM nin so easily. Now though, they realized they should have seriously thought about what they would do if they encountered a stronger team. Thinning out the ranks wasn't worth this risk. Hiding behind some bushes for cover as they watched Gaara, now that they remembered whom the boy was from when Naruto had brought him up effortlessly the remaining AIM nin, Kiba motioned for them to wait for the Suna team to leave before taking off themselves as Gaara and his siblings discussed something. Hinata and Shino agreed without question, neither of the two thinking that sneaking away would be a good idea at the time. They continued to watch as Gaara's bloodlust rose, permeating the whole area. It was obvious he wanted to more. The oppressive feeling of hissing intent bore down on them, causing Akamaru to whine. Kiba tried to quiet the pup, but it was already too late. Gaara had noticed them. With a flick on his wrist, the sand rushed to them. Hinata had noticed Gaara's shift in attention to the three of them a split second before Kiba and Shino. She'd used it wisely, jumping away from the deadly mineral. Shino hadn't noticed Gaara's attention on them as quickly as Hinata, but he'd swiftly performed a kawarimi to escape. Kiba was the only one among them who hadn't been so lucky. He'd been trying to quiet Akamaru when Gaara noticed them, and he was still busy with his dog when the sand came at him. It was only a fraction of a second that allowed Gaara to trap him before he could kawarimi, but obviously that's all the deranged redhead needed. Now Kiba was screaming, the sand crushing him. As Gaara squeezed the Inuzuka only wished the Suna nin would make his death as swift as the AIM nin before him. Kiba, Karen and Team 7 were making good time through the forest. The four of them flew through the trees at a brisk pace, not wanting to get held up by any enemy teams that might try to take a shot at them, not that they were really worried about that. Sakura's genjutsu was doing its stuff expertly. The four of them had already come across two enemy teams, yet they hadn't been noticed at all. At this rate we'll be at the tower in no time. Think about it guys, We'll be the only team to have made it through the exam without having to lift a finger in an actual fight. Wouldn't that be cool? Questioned Naruto enthusiastically. His father would probably like to hear that. They'd gotten through the exam with nothing but stealth and a bit of familial help courtesy of Karen. There hadn't been a moment where anyone could have observed their skills, which meant that they'd have nothing but surprise to show off in the next exam. Oh yeah, Naruto just knew Minato would be proud of him. You shouldn't speak so soon, Naruto. You never know what could happen, Sasuke replied, now significantly more calm than he was after Karen had joined them. Shut up, Tem. Stop being such a spoil sport. Can't you just enjoy when good things happen? Naruto retorted with a frown. Little did he know that Sasuke would be right, and he soon found himself taking back his words when a giant snake leapt up from the ground below. The four of them managed to dodge the attack, albeit barely. As Naruto landed on a branch next to Sasuke, the Uchiha gave him a look that basically translated into, "I told you so." Shut up, Sasuke. Their slight banter didn't last any longer because the snake struck out again, aiming for them. Sasuke jumped above it, weaving hand signs for his ever-reliable Gokaku no Jutsu. The ball of fire bore down on the snake as Naruto dropped from the branch as he too weaved hand signs. Inten. Kusari Kyokuba. Chains emerged from Naruto's back, weaving together as they created 6 large conglomerations of chains. Large, sharp, arrowhead-shaped tips were the heads of the congregations of chains. Before the snake could even hope to react, Sasuke's fireball crashed into its head, searing the skin immediately as the 6 massive chains impaled the enormous reptile. The snake was dead before Naruto or Sasuke landed on another branch. Karen and Sakura rejoined them, and just as the Pinkett was about to suggest a strategy, a chuckle sounded from above. Looking to the branches above them, they saw one of the Kusa-nin from before the exam, specifically the one with the long tongue. My, you are all so much better than I expected. That snake was supposed to have at least one of you and separate the others, yet what do I find? My precious pet defeated so effortlessly. This will be more enjoyable than I thought, smirked the Kusa-nin as he began to radiating intent more vile and potent than what they'd felt from Zabuza, and that meant a lot to them. Goosebumps instantly sprouted to life across their skin as they went on the defense. Whoever this guy was, he was dangerous. Now then, said the Kusa-nin, his tongue momentarily flicking out of his mouth as his smirk broadened, shall we play? Kiba screamed as Gaara's sand continued to tighten, and though his teammates knew that Gaara was stronger than them, they wouldn't abandon Kiba. It just wasn't an option. Shino, feeling that a long-range assault would be smarter than getting in close, let his Kikaichu rush forward, intent on draining Gaara's chakra as swiftly as possible. He hoped he could drain the deranged Jinchuriki before any permanent harm could be done to his brash teammate. What he didn't expect though, were for his Kikaichu to be engulfed by more sand, stopping their assault in its tracks as Gaara continued to look toward Kiba, never batting an eye at Shino's assault as his face remained impassive, and then a sickening crunch was heard. Shortly after that, Kiba's screams intensified. Gaara had already broken his legs. This, Hinata couldn't understand. If Gaara broke Kiba's legs, why not just him? It was obvious he could break all the bones at once. And that's when it dawned on her. Oh god, he's torturing Kiba-kun, he's enjoying this. Her thoughts shook her to the core. Wasn't Kiba enough for him? Did he have to torture him too? As tears slipped down Hinata's cheeks, for the first time since she'd upped her training with Kurenai following Naruto's disappearance, she truly felt helpless. What could she do? Futon. Senpu Senmitsu. The jutsu broke everyone's concentration on Gaara's actions as a swift spiral of wind crashed into Kiba, ripping away the sand surrounding him and giving the genin a few cuts of his own. Kiba was tossed through the air, and once Hinata realized he'd just been saved, she dashed forward, sliding across the ground as she caught him. Growling, Gaara turned to them, his sand rising as if mimicking his anger. That was his. No one escapes him. He had to prove his existence. And this was the only way. Before he could let his sand ensnare his enemies once again though, another jutsu interrupted him. Rinpun Jujika. An X-shaped blade of sparkling wind crashed into the wall of sand that had come to defend him as Gaara felt his stomach clench in brief pain. He had been attacked, which could only mean one thing. There was someone like him on the battlefield now. Suddenly, his bloodlust rose, permeating the very air in the clearing as a vicious smile broke out across his face. There was someone here, there was someone before him that could do it. They could make me feel alive. Gaara's sand stirred violently, reacting to his excited exclamation, and shot forward in the swiftest charge his siblings had ever witnessed from it. And then it was stopped. An equally vicious wind had met the sand and the two cancelled each other out. That's when Gaara saw his enemies for the first time. There was 3 more shinobi standing before him now. One of them, the only male, looked absolutely terrified. Next to him was a woman with porcelain skin dressed in a seemingly battle-ready kimono. Her long, black, white-streaked hair swaying in the wind behind her as she gripped a naginata lazily at her side, her eyes closed. Then there was the tan-skinned female. Her green hair falling over her forehead as her narrowed eyes bore into him. This is the one, thought Gaara excitedly. Kill her. Her now. The voice of the Ikibi rang out in his mind, pushing mooring intent to the surface as Gaara fully intended to comply with the wishes of his mother. Naruto and his team, plus Karen, stared down the Kusa Nin in front of them cautiously. The intent he was leaking was downright vile, and none of them really wanted to see if his skills could back up the kind of bloodlust that was hidden behind the creepy smile on his face. Unfortunately, he knew, they all knew, that they weren't escaping this without a fight. And so it began. Tired of waiting and making them nervous, the Kusa Nin shot forward, catching Karen off guard. The members of Team 7, though, they'd been ready. The amount of speed the Kusa Nin displayed was nothing compared to what Kakashi had been drilling into Sasuke and Sakura, and as for Naruto, his father was the Yellow Flash. That's why the Kusa Nin was pleasantly surprised when he was outpaced by Naruto, finding a fist inches from his face despite the fact that he'd certainly moved first. Smirking, the Kusa Nin tilted his head, avoiding the blow, or so it seemed. A chain shot out of Naruto's arm as it passed the Nin's head, digging into his brain. Of course, that's only what Naruto had hoped for. Not what he was expecting to happen, nor was that what occurred. The Kusa Nin had kawarimied with a nearby log and landed safely on the ground below, only to look around and not see anyone. Genjutsu, thought the Kusa Nin, dispelling it seconds later to find multiple giant fireballs rushing towards him. Right before he could jump away, Naruto, who'd landed a few feet behind him, flashed through hand signs and called out his jutsu. Futon. Datapa. The wind thundered forward, reaching the Kusa Nin in the blink of an eye. The shinobi jumped, leaping over the 2 attacks with ease, but that would be a mistake. Sasuke's flames and Naruto's wind met, crashing together briefly before the flames grew hotter and larger. They leapt into the air, more powerful than before, and engulfed the Kusa Nin within their skin-searing grasp. We get him? Asked Sakura, frowning at how easily her genjutsu had been dismissed. It had been a good one. A high C rank that would have handled any other genin. This meant only one thing in her eyes. Their enemy wasn't a genin at all. We can hope, began Naruto, but I doubt it. Sasuke silently agreed. As for Karen, she'd watched Team 7 work and couldn't believe what she was seeing. The three of them worked so well together, highly surprising since they hadn't actually worked as a team in a while, not that she'd know that though. None of the teams she'd encountered in her own village had teamwork like that. Initially, she'd hoped to help them, but after seeing this, she knew she couldn't keep up with the pace they'd set. Their relationship must be great. The trust they must have in each other for them to pull all this off. Oi, Dobi, called Sasuke as they waited for the flames to recede, next time don't get in my way. You ruined my plan. Naruto snorted. What plan, Tem? If not for my Daitapa he'd have totally gotten away from your fireballs. And you know it. Sasuke narrowed his eyes, obviously offended. As if he'd actually needed Naruto's help. You guys, this really isn't the time to be bickering, Sakura intervened, trying to calm her two teammates. Karen's brow twitched. Or it could have just been a fluke, she thought, finding that explanation to be more believable than her previous one. Just as Sasuke was about to refute what Naruto had said, a chuckle snapped the group's attention to the branches above. The Kusanin looked down at them, his clothing slightly burnt. Despite that, a smile was plastered across the shinobi's face. My, you are all so well trained. This is better than what I could have hoped for. Shall we see if you can keep up with me then? If I take things up a notch, surely you all won't mind. He didn't wait for a response. Blurring from their view, Sasuke heard Naruto grunt and looked towards him in time to see the blonde flying his way. He dodged and soon Naruto got his feet under him and skid to a stop a few feet behind the Uchiha before he blurred in kind. Meeting the Kusanin head-on, Naruto flowed around his attacks by the barest of margins, showing a grace Sasuke and Sakura had never seen from him as he and the shinobi traded blows. Naruto dodged a punch, replying with a swiftly extended leg, hoping to catch the Kusanin's foot and disturb his balance. The shinobi jumped and spun around, aiming a mid-air roundhouse kick at Naruto's face. Naruto dodged that as well, before grabbing the Kusanin's leg, spinning around and punishing him with an elbow to the ribs. The shinobi flew back, flipped, and then landed on his feet as two Narutos rushed him along with Sasuke and Sakura. The Kusanin ran at them in kind. Sakura led with a punch, which was blocked before she was thrown over the shinobi's shoulder. From there she threw 3 shuriken and watched in frustration as her enemy spun around and swiped them out of the air while blocking a kick from Sasuke with his free hand. The Kusanin turned again, meeting Naruto's fist with the shuriken gripped between his fingers. The clone popped and out of the smoke came another Naruto, his open palm flying at the Kusanin's stomach. The blow hit home and the enemy shinobi was pushed back a few feet as Sakura came up behind him, her fist reared back again and as she moved, Sasuke moved as well. The Kusanin attempted to kawarimi as Sakura's blow landed, but soon found that he couldn't. Forced forward, his eyes had just enough time to widen as Sasuke's hands glowed, electricity sparking around them as he stared his enemy down with his Sharingan active. Ah! He used his eyes to predict not only my moves, but his teammates as well. He knew I'd end up in these position moments before everyone else. Clever. Raiden. Jaibashi. Sasuke brought his hands to the ground and the lightning followed, arcing through it and tearing apart the earth as it neared the Kusanin and lit him up like a Christmas tree. The jutsu lasted for a few moments before the lightning died out and the Kusanin dropped to the ground, unmoving. That worked better than I thought it would, said Naruto. What did? Asked the Pinkett. Slapped a chakra restriction seal on him after he popped my clone. He's one seriously slippery bastard. Not so slippery anymore, it seems, Sakura replied. Sasuke grunted in agreement. They'd defeated their enemy, but still, something just didn't feel right. You can use seals without any sort of preparation. You really are something, aren't you? Maybe I will mark you as well. The enemy's voice startled them, causing the three genin to jump away as the Kusanin's crumpled body got back on its feet, his hair shrouding his face. "You're still not dead," Naruto exclaimed in question. "What's with this guy?" The Kusanin chuckled again, though this time it was significantly darker than before. Of course, after all, the Kusanin trailed off as he looked up, his hair no longer covering his face. Team 7 visibly recoiled at what they saw. They'd seen that face before. He was in their history books, and they knew right then that they'd gotten themselves into far more trouble than they'd been prepared for. Standing before them was the one and only treacherous snake of Konohagakure, Orochimaru. "I'm immortal." Gaara's sand rushed forward and the green-haired Taki Nin leapt into the air, where she proceeded to sprout wings. Hinata and Shino were shocked. Flying over the sand as her female teammate spun her naginata in front of her, generating a massive wall of wind that stopped the sand in its tracks, the flying Taki Nin swooped down at Gaara as her voice invaded Hinata's and Shino's minds. "Name's Fu. Wouldn't usually help another team, considering what's going on in these exams and all, but I don't think anyone deserves to be taken out the way he was going to your teammate. Not in this situation. I mean really. There wasn't even any information on the line and, well, I'm rambling aren't I? Whatever." Fu thought at them as she dodged a pillar of sand, spun around, and did something Gaara's siblings hadn't expected. With the help of some blindingly bright powder Fu had exhaled, mixed with a bit of wind chakra, she'd blown past Gaara's defending wall of sand and nailed him in the face with her left foot, sending the red-headed Jinchuriki skidding back a few feet before his sand seemed to spaz out and converge on Fu. "I'll distract this guy. You guys follow Hajiri and you don't know who that is, huh? Well, they're obviously my teammate, and they're a she, so I doubt that's hard to figure out whom I'm speaking of anymore, huh? Anyway, she'll lead you to safety, which basically is just far away from here. I'll catch up in no time." Though still thoroughly confused with the fact that the ninja who'd just saved them was speaking directly into their heads, Hinata and Shino complied anyway as Hajiri quickly leapt away from the battlefield, her male teammate following after her. As the four of them ran, Fu began to spin in place, rapidly. Kicking up quite the shimmering, scale powder-infused wind, she guarded against Gaara's sandy assault before shooting high into the air and diving down at him soon after. Gaara raised his hand, the sand reacting at a faster pace than before as it shot at Fu. Undeterred, she dodged, spinning around the swiftly approaching pillars of sand as they came at her. Temari had never seen anyone take her brother's attacks in such stride. For the second time that fight, Fu was upon Gaara and was attempting to bring her knee into his face, but unlike the kick she'd landed last time, Gaara was prepared. In a surprising display, Gaara's sand gathered beneath him and moved him back, allowing him to dodge the blow before it swelled beneath Fu and swatted her back into higher altitudes. As Fu tried to steady herself, she neared the ground while Gaara swiftly rode atop his sand towards her, the deadly mineral gathering at his back before he flung his hands forward and it leapt at Fu in a wave. The sand crashed into Fu and she kawarimid with some powder she'd exhaled a few feet away. Unfortunately, this would not save her. The sand overtook her, engulfing the girl and crashing into the ground soon after. Sabaku Q. The sand lifted into the air, bringing Fu with it as it did so. Gaara raised his hand, and then clenched it into a fist. Sabaku Soso. The sand squeezed. Blood spattered across the ground. Hajiri led her teammate, Hinata, and Shino, who was carrying Kiba and Akamaru, through the trees. They'd made good time and had already put a good amount of distance between themselves and the team from Suna. Suddenly, Hajiri stopped. "This should be good enough," she said, her tone calm and collected. "Is your friend going to be alright?" asked Hinata, worried for one of the people who'd saved them. Not sure, Hajiri replied simply as she turned to them, her eyes still closed. Hinata found this quite odd. That's why I plan to go back and make sure she's okay though, she requested I do so anyway. When did? She spoke into my mind. Hajiri told Hinata before the shy Hyuga could finish her question, she told you guys to follow me the same way, right? Shino nodded. What was that? If you do not mind me asking, Shino inquired, carefully setting Kiba onto a thick branch as Hinata stepped over to inspect his injuries. Oh, that's just Fu's transmission technique. Let us just say it is a side effect of Fu's condition. A very useful one. Hinata could only assume the wings were another side effect. Stay here, please. I will go assist Fu and then we will be back shortly after that, said Hajiri. She sounded so sure of that. As if she knew they would escape Gaara's clutches. Hopefully your friend will be okay. And with those parting words, Hajiri leapt back the way they came, moving faster than she had before, much faster. Orochimaru. Naruto breathed out, less confident in his team's chances than he had been moments ago. I should have known the enemy wasn't giving it his all the second time around either. He had more bloodlust than Zabuza. What the hell had I been expecting? In the flesh, replied the ex-Konoha shinobi as he ripped the skin of the dead Kusagaker genin off of his face. This action alone seemed to change Orochimaru's whole presence on the battlefield. His intent spiked, a cold tingle shot up the backs of Naruto and his companions as the air seemed to be weighed down with a sense of foreboding and dread. What do you want? Asked Sakura, mentally cursing herself for being unable to prevent her fear from leaking into her voice. Why did you attack us? Orochimaru grinned, and they all took a step back. That's simple, smirked the Sannin, I want Sasuke-kun. Ah, but first, I'd really like to see what else you all can do. I didn't expect this team to be so well trained. Even dear Sasuke-kun is farther along than I could have hoped for. Naruto grimaced. I'm not letting you touch my teammate, challenged the blonde Jinchuriki. He hadn't wanted to pull out all the stops here, no matter what happened. But now, he didn't think he'd have a choice. Orochimaru chuckled. You're amusing, you think you have a choice. Without warning, the Sannin shot forward. And Naruto replied in kind. Kushina, Anko, and the group of Anbu they collected raced through the forest. Kushina led the group, desperate to reach her son before Orochimaru could do anything to him. There had been nothing that led Kushina and Minato to think Orochimaru would go after their son, except for one thing. And it was one of three things that truly mattered to Orochimaru. Being able to learn every jutsu in existence had been the snake's dream. And what genin in the forest had a metaphoric cheat sheet to make that possible? The answer to that was simple, Uchiha Sasuke. The young boy possessed the Sharingan and that was all the evidence any of them needed to know what Orochimaru was doing in the forest. That's why Kushina was worried about her son. He was Sasuke's teammate, so if Orochimaru found Sasuke, he would find Naruto. Just the thought of that traitor finding her son made Kushina pick up her pace. Until a pillar of malevolent red chakra shot into the air, filling the forest with its powerful aura. The chakra pervaded the air and filled even the Anbu with fear. It was filled with loathing, malice, and intent that would make lesser men commit suicide just to escape its reach, and its reach was far. This was the chakra of the Kyuubi. No, Kushina whispered, and then she took off, rushing towards the pillar of malevolence as adrenaline pumped through her veins. Fear was the driving force behind all her thoughts, all her actions. Not fear for the village, no. She didn't care about them. This was fear for her son. 20 minutes before the Kyuubi's chakra was released, Gaara held Fu in the air. Prepared to end her life, he spoke. Sabaku Soso. The sand squeezed. Blood spattered across the ground. But that blood was not Fu's. Gaara put his hand to his chest as his siblings looked on, wide-eyed. Pulling away from his chest, he looked down at his palm. It was covered in bright red. Looking from his palm to his chest, he saw the long cut across his pectorals. His shirt was ripped open and the edges of the torn clothing were dyed red, the color spreading. It did not take long for everything to click for the crazed Jinchuriki. He was bleeding. He had been injured. Blood. This person was a threat to his existence. My blood. He would exterminate them. All you, roared Gaara as he glared at Fu. She was covered in a red cloak of demonic chakra. 2 sets of wings were on her back, but only one of them was not made of the oppressive energy. The chakra had blown away his technique, while she'd replied with one of her own, leaving Gaara to bleed. It had happened so quickly he hadn't even seen what hit him, and the technique had been so powerful that it had breached his layer of sand armor. If he'd taken such an attack without it, Gaara doubted he'd have survived. The cloak surrounding Fu was reminiscent of a beetle. If the wings she'd sprouted before weren't a clear enough indicator for the Ikibi as to whom his Jinchuriki was doing battle with, it was certainly clear now. We'll see about that, countered Fu as she sped towards Gaara, appearing before him in a blink. His sand had no time to react and he was thrown into the air by the horn that was at the head of the cloak. Fu shot up after him, his sand trailing behind her in attempt to attack her and defend Gaara. Growling, Fu flew through hand sings before firing off another Rinpun Jujika. Snarling, Gaara knew his sand would not catch up with her, let alone catch up to her jutsu in time. Taking the hit, the Ikibi Jinchuriki used the Kawarimi technique, switching himself with some of his sand at the ground level before he quickly covered himself in a ball of sand. Fu hovered overhead, looking down at the ball warily. What could this be? She wondered. While Fu battled with Gaara, Naruto and his team were locked in a battle of their own. Now that Orochimaru had revealed himself, the fight had gotten much harder. His speed had increased, as had his strength, and he was actually fighting back now, and yet they all knew he was nowhere near serious. After Naruto's and Orochimaru's initial charge at each other, the three of them quickly realized he'd be no match alone. They'd already known as much, of course, but the ease with which Orochimaru easily blocked, avoided, and countered all of Naruto's attacks really made the immense gap in skill set in for them. They couldn't fight him and win, but they couldn't run either. He would undoubtedly catch them. This meant they only had one option. They'd have to fight, and hope that someone would save them. Gokaku no Jutsu, called Sasuke, sending another fireball at the Sannin. Orochimaru easily slipped past it, closing in on the Uchiha before he was intercepted by Naruto. The young Uzumaki jumped at the Sannin, aiming a kick at Orochimaru's head. Blocking the kick, the Sannin was surprised to see Naruto twist his body, his other leg coming around in an attempt to impact the back of his skull. Smiling, Orochimaru ducked and prepared to counter-attack until his instincts told him he needed to dodge. Using his superior speed, Orochimaru leapt forward and avoided whatever the genin had planned. Looking back, he saw Naruto's open palm strike the ground as the boy cursed briefly. He just brushed off my Geike like it was nothing, thought Naruto. Damn. That was my most unpredictable attack too. Well, almost. Standing up straight again, he rushed forward, flanked by Sasuke and Sakura. This time, Sakura was the first to strike, throwing out a first aimed at Orochimaru's face as she tried to bring her leg into his knee in hopes of throwing off his balance. Orochimaru grabbed her fist, tugged, and threw her over his shoulder. Mid-air, the young Kunoichi grabbed a fist full of shuriken from her pouch and whipped them at the Sannin as Sasuke and Naruto ran at him. Smirking, Orochimaru ducked beneath the shuriken, letting them fly towards the other two members of Team 7. Not surprised, Sasuke and Naruto plucked the weapons out of the air and pocketed them. Brandishing a kunai now, the Uchiha aimed for Orochimaru's head. The traitorous snake dodged the blow, tilting his head just enough for the blade to sweep past his cheek, then his neck extended and his head shot towards Sasuke's neck. Caught off guard, Sasuke didn't have time to try and avoid whatever it was Orochimaru had planned. Luckily for him, Naruto had his back. A chain flew from Naruto's arm, approaching the Sannin's head rapidly. Orochimaru weaved around the chain before retracting his neck and taking a step back where he promptly vanished from sight, leaving Naruto's chain to fly towards the unsuspecting Sakura. After being thrown, the young Kunoichi had regained her footing and aimed to attack the Sannin from behind. Much like the last time, the result this time around was far less pleasing though. Staring down a sharp chain was definitely something she could do without. Thankfully for her, Naruto made the chain vanish before it could cause her harm. The four genin looked around, examining their surroundings as they searched for their opponent. Slowly they drew near one another, regrouping back to back in the hopes of covering for one another. It seemed as if Orochimaru had left, but they knew he was still here. They could feel his intent. The problem was that the Sannin's intent could only be described as omnipresent, they could feel it all around them. With no specific location to give Orochimaru away, the four genin couldn't even begin to pinpoint him. What now? Asked Sakura as she hefted a kunai, ready to strike at a moment's notice. The question was if that moment would be enough to save her. To save them, we continue to do what we've been doing. We have no other choice. Obviously he's still toying with us, albeit more seriously than before, Naruto replied as he crouched down, his legs ready to spring him into action. Sasuke grunted his agreement as he gripped the shuriken in his pouch. "See, certainly we'd be dead by now if he wasn't," stuttered Karen, as she tried to stop her trembling. Indeed, that voice didn't belong to any of them. Trees fell to the ground as something long and sharp sliced through them like butter. Sasuke, thanks to his eyes, was the first to catch the gleam of metal. Shouting to his companions to jump, they all took to the air, just in time to miss the blade of a frighteningly long sword. The blade continued on, slicing through more trees. At that point, Sakura frowned before a look of alarm spread across her face. Looking up, she saw exactly what she'd feared. The trees in this forest were tall, so tall that the first signs of any branches was at least a good 50 to 60 feet in the air. And the trees were taller still. Therein laid their problem. Orochimaru had just cut down a good portion of trees that were now falling towards the four of them. Dodge! Sakura screamed as she shifted her weight mid-flight, setting herself up so she could easily move past one of the many falling trees. The rest of her companions did the same and soon the four of them were actively dodging the falling foliage. Unfortunately, that's exactly what Orochimaru wanted. Sune Tajishu. Snake upon snake came at them from their left, weaving through the trees with ease and alarming speed. Shit! Cursed Naruto as four clones burst into existence. His clones reached for his friends as he grabbed the hands of the clone closest to him and let it throw him higher up. His other three clones attempted the same with his companions, two of them made it to Sasuke and Karen, but the one attempting to make it to Sakura was bitten by a snake, dispelling it. "Sakura!" yelled Sasuke as he dispelled the Naruto clone by very forcefully using it as a stepping stone. Flying through the air, he tackled Sakura out of the path of the snakes. Unfortunately, they now had no saving grace from the trees. The many, many trees. "No!" screamed Naruto as he and Karen cleared the collapsing canopy. Panicked, the blonde Uzumaki swiftly shifted his body so he could get a better look at the trees below. For a moment there was nothing, but then he let out a breath he hadn't even known he was holding when the trees at the top of the massive pile caught fire. Naruto and Karen now shifted their weight to allow themselves to fall faster, and soon enough they were landing next to the pile. Orochimaru was nowhere in sight. Not that they would ever think that was good, so they took this time to reach their companions and hopefully inspect any wounds. They knew that being on guard against an opponent of his caliber would do them no good. "Are you two okay?" Karen inquired, leaning next to Sasuke and Sakura to see how badly they were hurt. Neither of them had any serious-looking exterior wounds. There was no blood, nor were there any cuts. Unfortunately, that didn't mean the two of them were okay. Sasuke sported a few burns, probably from being in too close a proximity to whatever Kaden jutsu he'd used to avoid being crushed. The young Uchiha was also favoring his right arm as he kneeled, his breath ragged and short. "I'm fine," he lied, standing slowly to his feet. He knew they couldn't afford any of them becoming dead weight. "I twisted my ankle when we landed," Sakura grit out, "it's sprained. My left hand is swelling too," she admitted. She'd used her hands to shield Sasuke from a tree right before he could cast his jutsu. "Do you know enough medical ninjutsu to help?" Naruto asked, his tone grave. He knew how bad the situation was now, as if it hadn't been disastrous before. Now this was far worse. "No," Sakura admitted frustratedly, biting back the regret and shame she could feel trying to make itself known. "If I hadn't been so obsessed with Sasuke, maybe I could have." It shouldn't have taken her this long to truly realize how foolish she'd been for trying to garner Sasuke's attention so religiously. And she knew it. That's what made it hurt all the more. Naruto grit his teeth at her response, but nodded nonetheless. Their battle potential had just dropped drastically. Karen hadn't been able to keep up with them before now, so with Sasuke, no matter how much he'd like to deny it, and Sakura down, that only left one of them able to fight. If Naruto was the only one left, he doubted he'd be able to hold Orochimaru's attention for long before the Sannin became bored and decided to them. Not unless. No. The young Uzumaki knew, even then, they'd need a miracle or at the very least, some way to get the rest of Team 7 back into the fight. "I can help," voiced Karen, causing her three downhearted companions to look her way. "You know medical ninjutsu?" asked Sakura, prompting Karen to shake her head. "No," she responded, "but the Uzumaki clan always had special chakra. You could say it's fairly potent, full of life. Mine a little more so than others. It's going to be a bit weird, but this can work. It will heal you." "What will?" Karen looked to Sasuke at that. "Biting me. My chakra is special that way. If you bite me, your wounds will heal up. It may take a bit of time, but as long as Naruto can at least hold Orochimaru off, then you two can get back into this fight." The three members of Team 7 looked to each other briefly, in spoken understanding passing between them, and with a nod between the three of them, Sakura told Karen to do it. Rolling back her sleeves, the Kusa Kunoichi let Sasuke and Sakura begin the healing process as Naruto stood up and dipped his hand into his kunai pouch. "This could work, but if we're going to have a chance at this, I'm going to have to use that. Not like I'd have had any other choice. All I've currently got left that has any chance of working," thought Naruto with a scowl. "This is our last chance." Standing protectively in front of his friends, 5 clones popped into existence around Naruto. He didn't need to wait long for his opponent. Orochimaru appeared before the boy, seemingly just coming into existence, but that was not the case. He'd just been far too fast for Naruto to see, even with the eye of a shinobi who'd been trained to emphasize and notice high-speed movements. The Sannin chuckled to himself as he walked forward, his eyes never leaving Team 7. Coming to stop mere feet before them, he spoke. "You all have put on quite the show for me, I must say. I thank you for that much. You've made this little visit to my previous home just a bit more enjoyable than what I'd originally predicted. A shame though, that all good things must eventually come to a close. I've had enough entertainment. How about you all just stand down and let me do what I came here to do now, I'm not letting you touch my friend, snake freak. Kuku. Orochimaru's laugh, cold and full of a deadly amusement, sent shivers down Naruto's spine. You boy, what could you possibly hope to do against me? Asked the Sannin, choosing to ignore Naruto's childish insult. This came the young Uzumaki's reply, his eyes narrowing as his clones leapt towards the Sannin, pushing themselves as to move at their absolute fastest. With a sadistic grin, Orochimaru greeted them by popping one of them out of existence before dodging a kick to the head as he blocked a punch to his abdomen with a skillfully placed elbow that dispelled the clone on contact. Chains shot out of the forearm of a clone that Orochimaru allowed to take his back. The quartet of chakra weapons raced forward, intent on impaling the Sannin as Orochimaru suddenly dropped to the ground, sweeping the clone that had tried to attack him at his front off its feet, the chains passing swiftly overhead. Orochimaru didn't stay low to the ground for long though, he quickly leapt to his left, the clone that had tried kicking him now rushing his way, brandishing a kunai as it flicked 3 shuriken the Sannin's way. Smirking, Orochimaru dodged one with a tilt of his head, allowing the weapon to bury itself into the cranium of one of the other 2 Naruto clones, dispelling it. Surprise attacks don't work, commented the snake as he plucked the remaining 2 projectiles out of the air. You should know that by now, he added, catching the clone's kunai between his fingers as it attempted to stab him before driving the shuriken into its stomach. The clone popped and Orochimaru turned around to deal with the last of the clones before his finely trained ears caught the sound of faint hissing from the incoming Bunshin. Smiling at Naruto's deviousness, Orochimaru leapt back, the clone exploding forcefully enough to knock the Sannin off balance. The snake Sannin couldn't help smiling to himself again. He never would have expected a genin to have access to any explosive notes that were even half as powerful as that. Not finished with his assault, Naruto flicked the hand he'd been keeping in his weapons pouch out, a kunai darting towards Orochimaru's head soon after. It moved through the air faster than any other projectile Naruto had thrown thus far, yet Orochimaru dodged it still. Despite that, there was something peculiar about the kunai, something Orochimaru didn't notice due to various factors: the speed the kunai was moving, the smoke from the recent explosion, and the angle of the kunai in correspondence to the angle of the Sannin's body. The kunai had 3 prongs. And as Orochimaru set his gaze in Naruto's direction, intent on seeing what they boy's next move would be, all the Sannin saw was a brief flash of white. Haifushin. Naruto's cry rang out through the clearing as he appeared in a white flash above Orochimaru, Hiraishin kunai in his right hand while his left was encased in chains meeting a few inches ahead of his fingers in a very deadly point as he thrust it into Orochimaru's body. Temari and Kankuro watched as Fu hovered above their brother's sphere of protective sand. They couldn't believe things had escalated this far. They'd only intended to take out a team of AIM Nin who'd thought they could take them down. They couldn't understand how that had turned into a throwdown between 2 Jinchuriki. Worst of all, there was nothing they could do about it. They couldn't try to offer a scroll to Fu in order to get her to leave. That wouldn't matter to Gaara. He wouldn't stop even if she agreed, which also meant they couldn't try and calm their brother. He was too far gone. In fact, they were more likely to get themselves ed trying something like that. They knew that all they could do was watch this play out and hope it didn't get much worse. Fu continued to look down at the sphere Gaara had encased himself in. It had already been a little over a minute since he'd done this and she was no longer keen on waiting on him. Whatever he was doing that was taking this long couldn't be a good thing in her eyes. With that in mind, Fu tore through the air towards the sphere, which responded to her assault with one of its own. An arm of sand shot out at her, forcing Fu to twirl her body over it in order to dodge. Gaining a bit more altitude, she stopped abruptly as she went through a few hand seals before breathing deep and bringing a hand to her lips. Futon. Rinpun Rinkuden. Breathing out, Fu fired off a volley scale powder enhanced bullets of wind that whistled through the air and impacted Gaara's sand sphere. They drilled into the sphere and for a moment there was silence. Then Gaara screamed. The sand around the Aikibi Jinchuriki fell away. Standing there, clutching his bleeding shoulder was Gaara, his face contorted in a mixture of rage and suffering. You! Gaara growled out as he looked up to Fu. Through the haze of bloodlust and his mother's directions, Gaara was beginning to realize he was outmatched. I don't want to die. Mother. She wouldn't let me run away. I can't. I won't. I will prove my existence. I have to. I have to feel alive. The moments of contemplation in Gaara's mind brought forth a whole new wave of intent from the boy. Feeling this, Fu rushed forward, intending to put Gaara down before he tried anything funny. She would be just a second too late. Before Fu could reach her fellow Jinchuriki, Gaara's body began to change. It was a swift transition, too quick for Fu to attack him before it was over, yet just slow enough for her to think she could. Now she was mere inches away from a miniature Shukaku, and there was nothing she could do about it. With a growl, Gaara's tail shot forward. Fu brought up her arms, blocking the blow. Unfortunately, the pure brute strength behind the attack sent her flying back, giving Gaara just enough time to inhale a large quantity of air. Fu stabilized herself just in time to watch Gaara exhale. Mugen Sajin. Datapa. The squall shot forward, slamming into Fu with bone-breaking force. If not for her Biju cloak, she'd have surely broken a few bones. Continuing to fly back, she crashed into a tree and it too was uprooted by Gaara's jutsu. Fu and a majority of the trees that had surrounded them flew back, tearing a swath through the forest. Gaara gave chase. Hijiri jumped through the trees, attempting to locate her teammate. She was almost back to where she'd left Fu when she felt it. A violent wind swept through the trees, making her stop on a branch. She'd never felt anyone aside from herself and Fu generate that much wind. Focusing her senses, she felt Fu's immense chakra pressure, a pressure she only associated with Fu using her Biju cloak. That probably would have made her breathe a sigh of relief if not for the equally powerful pressure that was far too close to her teammate. Taking off through the trees at a faster pace than before, Hijiri knew one thing. Fu was in need of assistance. Groaning, Fu struggled to her feet, feeling lucky that none of the trees Gaara had demolished fell on her. Well, I'm not the luckiest Biju for nothing, Fu. This is so not the time, Chome. Looking around, Fu didn't see Gaara. He must have sent her flying further than she'd expected, but she could definitely feel him coming. With that in mind, she took to the skies and flew in the opposite direction. She wasn't running away. She refused to just leave a rampaging Jinchuriki that she'd set off to come across any poor, unsuspecting genin in the forest. What she was doing though, was giving herself some time to catch her breath after having it so thoroughly knocked out of her. She had to give Gaara props. For being the Jinchuriki of the Aikibi, he still packed a hell of a punch. You shouldn't underestimate any of my kin, Fu, Chome scolded. Despite being the weakest of us, Shukaku is still a force to be reckoned with, as is his vessel. Sighing, Fu hummed her agreement and made it a mental note to take everything about Gaara seriously from now on. She now knew she didn't have the luxury to do otherwise. Naruto's conglomeration of chains ran through Orochimaru's body with a crunch that silenced the clearing. Sasuke and Sakura looked his way in jaw-hanging astonishment. It was slightly different from what they'd learned, but they knew exactly what that jutsu was. Now they just wondered one thing. How did Naruto learn it? For just a moment, naivety set in for the young Uzumaki and he thought himself successful, until he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand. He whipped around with his kunai at the ready and sliced an incoming snake from head to tail before he leapt back, his eyes glancing down at the Orochimaru heated, only to find a log. Kawarimi, thought Naruto, I should know better. You know the Hiraishin, or some variant of it at the least. For one so young that is quite interesting. You've piqued my curiosity, Naruto-kun. The way Orochimaru said his name sent shivers down Naruto's spine. I've decided, you, Sasuke-kun and that young Kusa Kunoichi all have such curious abilities. I must have you all. As for the pink-haired child, well, considering that Konoha won't be standing for too much longer anyway, it shouldn't matter when one of their genin ends up dead, don't you all agree? He asked with a sadistic smile spread across his lips. Naruto wasn't about to have any of that. Spawning 4 more Bunshin, they rushed for the Sannin as Naruto spoke up. All you before I ever let that happen. Your bravado truly knows no bounds, Orochimaru replied as he merely watched the clones approach. I'll have to work that out of you. Thoroughly. 2 of the clones took the lead as one slid low, the other one jumping for a flying kick at the Sannin's face. Orochimaru jumped over the sliding kick as he blocked the flying one with his arm. Bringing his feet down, he aimed to stomp the Bunshin below him out of existence only for its arms to shoot upward, spreading Orochimaru's legs fluently to avoid being popped as it continued the slide through his limbs. Now behind the Sannin, it shot to its feet, aiming for a blow to the spine as the clone that had gone for the flying kick used Orochimaru's arm to flip over him and aim for his neck. As this happened, a third clone shot forward as well, stopping in front of Orochimaru abruptly and forcefully driving its foot into the ground before striking out with 2 fists aimed at the Sannin's chest. Slightly impressed, Orochimaru finally realized where he'd seen moves like Naruto's before. Smiling to himself, the Sannin blocked the 2 attacks at his back with his elbows as the sword of Kusanagi freed itself from his throat and stabbed through the Bunshin at his front. Swiftly, Orochimaru whipped around with it and sliced through the clone in the air, giving the clone at ground level just enough time to deliver an open palmed strike to Orochimaru's abdomen. Hardly feeling the blow, Orochimaru's arm shot out and the Bunshin popped soon after. Whipping back around, his eyes caught sight of 2 white flashes. In a flash, one of the remaining Narutos was at his back as another appeared from above. The Naruto at Orochimaru's back went for the same twin fist strike as one of the Bunshin that had come before him as the Naruto from above used a stream of chains from his body to wrap around the Sannin's limbs. Ryusei. The twin strike hit hard, breaking Orochimaru's spine. Immediately, the Narutos realized something was wrong. There's no way a Sannin would actually be hurt from the technique of a genin. Even when Naruto considered the fact that he'd been using one of the Ryuchoken's Dogeki Yushiki techniques, which were meant to break bones, he doubted a shinobi of Orochimaru's caliber would be affected by it when a genin was the one who performed it. And he was right. The Orochimaru the Naruto's attack turned to mud and as the earth broke beneath the Naruto on the ground. Orochimaru's arms shot out and took hold of his legs. With a tug, he pulled the Naruto below the surface up to his head before exiting the earth himself. With a curse the Naruto in the air made an hand sign, causing the explosive notes on his Bunshin in the ground to go off. The explosion broke apart the earth. Rubble went flying as dust gave Naruto and Orochimaru cover. Damn. I wasted 2 uses of Haifushin just now and didn't get any, what? Naruto blinked a few times and shook his head as he squinted, trying to see through the dust. 3 uses of Haifushin and he was already feeling its special brand of consequences. Slapping his hands against his cheeks, Naruto tried clearing the haze in his mind. He couldn't let himself lose it. Not just yet. Refocusing, Naruto looked around before gritting his teeth. He'd have to use another one. In a flash of white he was gone, appearing behind Orochimaru, whom was mere feet away from his previous position. Chains shot out of his back and flew towards the treacherous snake. Orochimaru spun around, performed some hand signs, and exhaled a steady stream of fire Naruto's way. The chains tore through with ease, and as Orochimaru went to bat them away, Naruto vanished once more. Appearing just in front of the Sannin, Naruto's right hand shot towards Orochimaru's face, flattened out like a sword. Orochimaru tilted his head to avoid the blow, but Naruto's hand still grazed his cheek, drawing blood. Smiling briefly, Orochimaru opened his mouth, the sword of Kusanagi darting out. If not for the last-second Kawarimi he'd performed, Naruto was sure he'd have died. Instead, a log met its end. To think there would still be a living practitioner of the Ryuchoken, chuckled Orochimaru as Naruto repositioned himself in front of his friends. I've not met someone who could perform such techniques since the Yondaime's wife. Speaking of the late fourth, you resemble him quite closely, and your skills are so reminiscent of that couple. Curious. Naruto narrowed his eyes. Even through the worsening haze of his mind, he could tell that the dots Orochimaru was connecting would lead to nothing good. I definitely want you just as much as Sasuke-kun now. With the two of you, I could learn not only every ninjutsu, but every fuinjutsu as well. What luck I have, smiled the Sannin. Now, unfortunately for Naruto, Orochimaru actually felt like going on the attack. Speeding through hand signs so quickly that Naruto couldn't even attempt keeping up, Orochimaru let loose his jutsu. Suiten. Daibakufu no Jutsu. From the Sannin's mouth, an enormous amount of water escaped, rising into the air and casting a large, foreboding shadow on the group of genin below it. Naruto realized they would have no escape without him. Creating a shadow clone, he ordered it to run off at full speed. Doing as instructed, the Bunshin hoped to clear the area of affect of Orochimaru's jutsu. Right when the massive swell of water was about to crash down on them, Naruto received his clone's memories, made sure his friends were all touching one another as he placed his hand on Karen's shoulder and blinked away in a flash of white. A good distance away from the jutsu, the four of them appeared once more and watched it devastate the land. The water uprooted trees and carved out a hollow in the ground. It decimated everything it hit, and nothing but a scar in the earth remained of the man-made natural disaster. As this happened, Naruto was cradling his head in his hands, his mind racing yet thinking of nothing concrete. He'd reached his limit with the Haifushin. 6 uses had already severely impaired his thought process, and if that wasn't bad enough, his latest use was just barely out of the range he was currently capable of. He couldn't afford to perform any more Haifushin. They would leave him in an unconscious heap on the ground. While the young Uzumaki was once again trying to order his thoughts, Orochimaru appeared before them once more. Taking in their kneeling forms and the look of pure exhaustion on Naruto's face, Orochimaru could tell that they had nothing else to resist him with. Naruto was finally down, Sasuke and Sakura weren't combat ready yet, and Karen's chakra was going to them. He'd won. With a smile, the Sannin began his approach, intent on collecting his prizes. Naruto watched Orochimaru approach with fear running rampant through his mind. He couldn't force it away and fight any longer, he no longer had the mental strength. As a matter of fact, he didn't have the mental fortitude to keep something even more terrifying at bay either. Looks like it is my turn, brat. And with those words, Naruto let loose an animalistic yell as he was engulfed in an oppressive red chakra, the pillar of malevolence shooting into the sky. Minato felt it. Even from the Hokage's office, He could feel the Kyuubi's chakra. He didn't need to look at Hiruzen's face to know he felt it too, but he could feel it on a completely different level. The half of the Kyuubis he had within him was reacting to the chakra, causing the Yondaime some discomfort and forcing him to rein in his chakra lest he too begin to lose control. How are we going to explain this, I wonder? Spoke Hiruzen, not truly asking a question. Believe me, by the time I get around to it, no one will be calling for blood. And if they still do, well, I'll see to that personally, Minato replied as the door burst open, revealing Homura and Kaharu. With a sigh from both the Sandaime and Yondaime, they prepared themselves to put those two in their place for one last time. Fu was busy maintaining her lead on Gaara as she saw and felt a massive spike of demonic chakra up ahead. She'd known there was another Jinchuriki in the forest, but she wasn't expecting what she was feeling now. The pure hatred from the chakra was maddening. Fu, head towards that chakra. Chomei's direction almost made the poor girl run into a tree. What? No. I have enough issues right now, don't you think? She wasn't about to deal with another crazed Jinchuriki. That's what she felt about the situation anyway. Any normal person would feel the same. Trust me on this, will you? Asked Chomei. I know exactly to whom that chakra belongs. If you lead Shukaku there, I guarantee we'll have some help taking him down. Though she was immensely skeptical, Fu gave in with a sigh. She had yet to come up with an idea herself anyway. Might as well roll with the punches, she thought as she increased her speed. She knew Gaara would continue to follow her even if she sped up. Her intention was to buy enough time to convince the Jinchuriki up ahead to help her. Fu weaved through the trees, the chakra pressure from earlier growing as she did so. As she drew near, she became more anxious about Chomei's plan. Now that she was closer, she could feel another chakra source tangled up with that of her fellow Jinchuriki. It was much more controlled, but unfortunately no less potent. Maybe you're not so lucky after all, Chomei. Hey, you win some, you lose some. No, definitely not what I want to hear out of your mouth in our situation. Fu could feel the Biju's shrug, and it pissed her off. Do you even have shoulders? Details. Details. More importantly, Fu, pay attention. We're really close. And they were. Fu snapped back to reality and looked around as she weaved through a few more trees, and that's when she saw them. In a clearing up ahead were 5 people. 3 of which were kneeling on the ground, watching the fight between the remaining 2 occupants unfold. Speaking of those 2, one was a very pale man with a creepy smirk plastered across his face and the other was her fellow Jinchuriki, clad in a cloak of red chakra reminiscent of a fox. Chomei had told her many things about his siblings over the years, so connecting the cloak to the Kyuubi was child's play. She watched for a moment as Naruto and Orochimaru did battle. The cloaked Uzumaki leapt at the Sannin, his claws nearly swiping Orochimaru's face as he retaliated with a kick to the gut that was blocked by Naruto's chakra tail. Before Orochimaru could pull back, a blast of chakra from Naruto's mouth crashed into him, sending the Sannin skidding back as Naruto pressed his assault, dashing forward. Fu could feel Chomei's need to help his kin, so she quickly made her way over to Naruto's companions. Are you with the pale guy or blondie? Fu inquired, startling Naruto's friends. The blonde, Sasuke responded, glaring at Fu. She was clad in a similar chakra cloak as Naruto, but that didn't mean much to him. She could still be a threat, and with the level of chakra he could feel from her, he knew she would be a very big one if she so chose. What of it? Humming to herself, Fu nodded and turned away from them. Good, good. I'll go help him out then. Now that I know you guys won't try backstabbing me for it or anything. That would if that happened, you know. I'd prefer noting you guys and all, especially if you're this injured. What fun is that? Where is the honor? Though I guess shinobi don't technically have honor. Fighting fair isn't our thing and all. Leave that to the samurai, know what I'm saying. So anyway. Fu. Rambling again. Oh, I was rambling, wasn't I? Thanks Chome. Ah. Anyway, the name's Fu. Now you guys sit tight while I go help your friend. Time to do something dangerous. With that, her wings sprouted once more and she flew into the fray, leaving 3 very confused genin in her wake. What just happened? Sakura wondered aloud, her brow arched in confusion. I have no idea, Karen replied. She offered to help Naruto and after that it gets really confusing. Who the hell is Chome? Karen asked as she watched Fu dart into the battle, blocking an incoming strike against Naruto from Orochimaru's fist as she spun midair and nailed the Sannin in the face with a swift kick. Orochimaru, not expecting the sudden intrusion into his fight, stumbled back. Coming to a stop a few feet away from the 2 Jinchuriki, he rubbed his cheek and that's right when Gaara entered the clearing, alarming everyone as he ran straight at Fu and Naruto. 3 Jinchuriki. My. Well, I believe I can use this to my advantage. Orochimaru smirked as Gaara flung sand shuriken at his fellow Jinchuriki, only for the 2 of them to dodge, followed by Naruto's chakra tail digging into the ground and appearing behind Gaara moments later, smacking him in Orochimaru's direction as Fu flew towards them. Orochimaru prepared himself to swat her out of the sky, only for her to avoid engaging him or Gaara. Instead, she merely flew around the 2 of them, dodging when appropriate before backing off. Stopping a yard or 2 away from the snake in the crazy sand Jinchuriki, Fu flew through the hand signs of what Orochimaru noted as a weak fire jutsu before she fired it at them. He raised a brow, wondering what she hoped to accomplish as the crazed Ikibi Jinchuriki next to him ran towards the weak jutsu. Gaara did not get far though. Naruto's chakra tail had appeared from out of the ground again, tripping the mini Shukaku. As he fell to the ground kicking up a bit of dust, that's when Orochimaru noticed the luminous powder that had managed to elude his view until now. Fu's weak fire jutsu entered the outer layer of the powder and it immediately exploded, setting off a chain of explosions all around Orochimaru and Gaara. Rinpun Odoro. Following that jutsu, Fu performed a few more hand signs and exhaled more scale powder that shrouded the clearing. Hiden. Rinpungakur no Jutsu. With a way to hide now in place, Fu grabbed hold of Naruto, flew the boy out of the powder, set him down, and then bumped fists with him before he could even hope to protest in his angered state. Naruto's eyes shot open and he sat up quickly. Looking around, he found himself in a spacious room, the floor made of stone with intricate designs etched into them. Groaning, he stood to his feet and as he did someone spoke up behind him. Good. You're awake. Spinning around, Naruto came face to face with Fu, the towering form of Chome at her back. Wah! Fu put a finger to his lips, stopping his outburst and what she was sure would be a question. Shush. None of that. Here's the short version for now. Name's Fu. You're the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, I'm the Nanabi Jinchuriki. We bumped fists and with our Biju's consent we can enter this, she said, gesturing to the space around them, the Biju's meeting place. You were kind of running wild in the real world so I was hoping to calm you down here. Didn't know you weren't on good terms with the Kyuubi though, so this won't really help, I guess. Naruto backed up, moving his lips away from Fu's fingers. Her fingers are soft, thought Naruto before he shook the thoughts away, attributing them to his mental exhaustion. But, the Kyuubi hates me, why would he allow this? Because it was the only way I'd be able to speak to one of my more pleasant kin, brat, rumbled the deep voice of the Kyuubi. Turning around, Naruto came face to face with his tenant without bars in the way for the first time. He had to admit, the Kyuubi was far more intimidating outside his cell. How are you outside of the seal? questioned a panicked Naruto, before Fu put a hand on his shoulder. He's not. This place is just unaffected by the seal and its effects. Or it doesn't affect the seal, or something. Honestly, it's really complicated stuff that I don't get. The important thing is we're all here and we can talk. So let's cut to the chase, Fu commented. My Jinchuriki and I would like your assistance dealing with Shukaku, Kyuubi. In return, we will assist you in your battle with the pale human, Chome stated. The Kyuubi merely stared at his kin for a moment before giving an exasperated growl and a simple nod of his head. He liked Chome when he wasn't rambling about his luck and he was always up for putting that stupid Tanuki in his place, so why not? With a vicious smirk, the Kyuubi gave a more solid reply. You've got a deal. Chome returned this with a nod of his own, and just as they were about to leave the realm they were in, Fu spoke up. Oh, Kyuubi, think you could actually work with Blondie out there? We're more likely to pull this off. He can use his skills along with yours instead of him just running wild. With a very audible growl, the Kyuubi eyed Fu, then Chome, and finally Naruto before letting loose an annoyed huff. He would not like this. Fine. This one time I'll help the brat out. Just so I can get a shot at screwing with the Tanuki though, the Kyuubi snarled. Withholding his thoughts on the subject, Chome merely nodded once more and then the four of them were back in the real world. Fu pulled her fist away from Naruto's and the two stood. Naruto looked around and noted how his vision was much sharper and he felt the power of the Kyuubi's chakra flowing through his veins. It was like the time he'd fought Haku, but more powerful and without the thought-clouding head rush. Truly, the Kyuubi was something else. You ready for this? Asked Fu as a futon jutsu blew away her scale powder. Within the realm they'd met with the Biju a few minutes had passed, but in the real world it had only been a moment. Standing a few yards away from them was Orochimaru. His smirk was no longer there, but he didn't seem bothered by taking Fu's Rinpun Odoro, and she knew he took the attack. His right sleeve was singed. That made her wonder though. What had she gotten herself into if Orochimaru hadn't even been injured by her jutsu? Who is this guy? Fu asked Naruto. Orochimaru of the Sannin, he replied as he stood next to her, hunched over and letting all four of his limbs touch the ground as the Kyuubi gave him a small briefing on what he could currently do in this state. Already, Naruto knew it would go well with Dogeki Yushiki techniques. What? She asked after a pause, why would you even be fighting a guy like this? He attacked us. It was fight or let him do whatever he wanted. Not like we could run from a Sannin. Point. Well, enough chit-chat, said Fu as she rose into the air and looked towards Orochimaru again. That's when she realized something was off. Where was Gaara? Futon. Rinkuden. From a tree branch just behind them, Gaara exhaled bullets of wind, intent on having them eviscerate his fellow Jinchuriki, only for chains to free themselves from Naruto's back and block for himself and Fu. As the chains vanished back into Naruto's body, he and Fu took off. Naruto darted towards Gaara, the Ikibi Jinchuriki's tail whipping around as he spun to intercept. Naruto threw his arm out, the cloak around him flying forward and clashing with Gaara's tail before Naruto grabbed it and pulled. Gaara flew through the air towards the young Uzumaki as Naruto let go of his tail, flipped over the crazed boy, and nailed him with his chakra tail. Gaara flew further through the air, right towards Fu who was attempting to trade swift blows with Orochimaru and failing as Naruto landed on the branch Gaara had attacked them from. The Sannin may not have had the high ground right now, but he was fast. Orochimaru's neck extended and flanked her as the sword of Kusanagi once again freed itself from the Sannin's throat while he was already beginning the motions for a horizontal slash. Fu tilted her whole body back, flying backwards and passing beneath both the blade and Gaara who was a few inches above Orochimaru's sword. As she flew she spun around rapidly, creating a storm of scale powder around her that she shot towards the two of them with a very powerful flap of her wings. Both Orochimaru and Gaara, who had only regained his footing moments ago, dodged out of the powder's path. Neither of them was too keen on being caught up in that again. "No any Kaden jutsu?" Fu asked, startling Naruto as he'd heard the question seemingly within his own mind. He hadn't even seen her lips move. Choosing to ask later and just cooperate now, he replied. "Just one." He smirked, already understanding what Fu wanted. Though the two of them had never worked together before, their two tenants had and were guiding their Jinchuriki on how to best work with one another. Kaden. Hosenka no Jutsu. Naruto spewed 7 fireballs out of his mouth, controlling them with his chakra and leading them into Fu's scale powder. Naruto wasn't too good with Kaden Jutsu yet, and the Hosenka no Jutsu wasn't a very strong Kaden Jutsu in the first place, but it didn't need to be. Making contact with Fu's powder would turn those small fireballs into a massive explosion. Understanding this, though not intending to work together, both Orochimaru and the crazed Suna Jinchuriki performed their jutsu in retaliation. As Naruto's fireballs hit Fu's powder, the explosion was met with a Daibikufu on one side and a Mugen Sajin, Daitapa on the other. The force of the explosion was contained and would have been overpowered if not for Naruto's newly created clone throwing him into the air, where he focused the Kyuubi's chakra before expelling it from his mouth in a powerful blast of raw energy. The chakra slammed into the clash of jutsu below, resulting in an explosion that knocked the 4 battling Shinboi away, all while the remaining members of Team 7 and Karen watched on. Sakura shielded her eyes as the explosion carried dust and water through the air, only one thought passing through her mind. "They're like monsters." All was quiet in the clearing as Sasuke, Sakura, and Karen waited for the smoke to clear with bated breath. They hoped that Naruto and the Taki nin who'd come to help them would be the ones who would be victorious, but they couldn't be sure. Though the exchange between the 4 of them had been brief, they could tell that what they could only describe as a sand monster was strong, and they'd already known Orochimaru was a one-man army. "Do you think they won?" worried Karen, as she rubbed at the bite marks on her arms. Sasuke and Sakura hadn't extracted her chakra for long, but she still felt a bit drained, and being bitten was never a pleasurable feeling for her. "There's no telling," Sasuke replied as he gritted his teeth, watching the smoke clear. He couldn't believe what he'd just seen. The kind of power that had just been dangled in front of his eyes like a cat toy was beyond frustrating. He needed power like that. The young Uchiha couldn't understand how his blonde dunce of a teammate had gotten so strong. But he would find out. While Sasuke was mildly distracted with his thoughts, Sakura and Karen were squinting to attempt making something out through the dust, and after a moment they did. There, standing amongst the wet earth, the blown-away trees, and a few small fires was a lone figure. Karen brought her hands to her mouth, a gasp of horror ghosting past her lips and fingers a moment later. "No," breathed Sakura. She could feel herself trembling already. "No." There, standing amongst the carnage, was a lone figure. At their feet were 3 unconscious bodies. As Sakura screamed, the lone victor of the battle smirked darkly. A relatively unscathed Orochimaru was the last man standing. Naruto opened his eyes with a groan as he tried sitting up. His whole body ached in protest, causing him to wince in pain, but he managed to support himself with his arms. He felt weak. His mind was still kind of hazy, though he figured that could be from the sleep since it wasn't as bad as it was during his fight, and he felt completely drained in general. Doing his best to ignore his condition, he looked around, finding himself within a cozy room containing 3 other beds aside from his own, a single door across the room from the beds and a window at his back. Instantly, Naruto was on alert. He knew this wasn't where he'd lost consciousness, obviously. It wasn't nearly destroyed enough and there was a distinct lack of trees. Where am I? He wondered aloud, the door to the room opening a moment later. He tried to prepare himself for whoever would come through, but he was too drained to really do anything more than awkwardly attempt lifting himself further up.